We are going to talk now more about the border situation in depth with the former head of Border Patrol, Rodney Scott. Rodney, thanks for being here. You retired in August of this year.
That is correct. Thank you for having me, Brett. Appreciate it.
This makes you the highest ranking ex-Biden official to speak out, but you also worked in the Trump administration.
That's correct. I started as chief in February of 2020, and then through the transition for the first 7 months of the Biden administration.
You've been at this for a long time, though.
I started in San Diego in May 1992. It's kind of an important part of my career, though. That's when the whole mass migration issue was going on nationally. And then in 1994 is when Operation Gatekeeper got kicked off. And I had a front row seat to that as a young agent. That was the forming years of my career, if you will.
Yeah, so 30 years as a civil servant dealing with border issues primarily. Obviously, you've briefed both parties, but you're not a political guy.
Correct. I've done my best to stay nonpartisan. I obviously have not hesitated to advocate for border security, but I just lay out the facts without politics.
Well, let's talk about the facts and what has changed from the Trump administration border policies to the Biden administration's now.
The real thing that's changed is the focus on border security in general and acknowledging that border security is critical to homeland security and actually trying to control the border. The messaging has changed. I personally participated in some of the transition meetings. My staff participated in all of the transition meetings. We made it very clear that if we dropped all of the initiatives that had been put in place over the last several years, that we would get an influx of mass migration that we would not be able to control. The current Secretary of Mayorkas, he was part of DHS before, he ran CIS. He clearly understands and knows how to control the border and what needs to take place.
So if that's all true, then what's the motivation, do you think?
That's where you get into the politics. I'm not going to speculate on what anyone's motivation is, but I do know that they were briefed. It was very clear. There are people involved in this process that have been involved before, and they're choosing not to take simple common sense steps to secure the border.
Can you, for the average viewer at home, articulate kind of the difference about what would happen if an illegal immigrant came when you were Border Patrol chief before January 20th, 2021, and what happened after?
With Title 42, and that was a Health and Human Services regulation for COVID, you got to carve that part of it out, if you will. They would be met at the border, immediately fingerprinted, photographed for records checks quickly, and then expelled back to the country they came through. So during that time, the vast majority of people were quickly expelled back to Mexico or back to Canada, or other countries even where we had flights taking place to quickly get them out of the country and then keep America safe. That was slowly chiseled away. So right after the administration changed, there was some messages that went out, if you will, that we were no longer going to expel anyone under 18, unaccompanied minors. So as soon as there's any vulnerability that we show, or any certain class of people that we carve out to be processed under different processes that are going to allow them to come into the U.S., that will be exploited. We saw that immediately with the unaccompanied children. A couple of other decisions later, there started expanding out vulnerable populations, family groups coming through Mexico that increasingly were getting released into the U.S. and processed under Title VIII instead of 42.
That's families, pregnant women, and suddenly it was expanding beyond anybody under 18.
And then that just continued to expand, correct.
And what's the result of that?
The result of that is the message goes out, and then instead of having a couple of hundred encounters a day, we quickly went up to about 6,000 encounters a day. The little bit of misleading messaging in the public today too is they think this is just Mexico or South America. Border Patrol caught people from 150 different countries coming through Mexico into the United States this last year before I retired.
150 different countries.
Different countries.
Coming through the border.
Correct. It's basically just think like football. Basically, they fake a play over here and the real play is going to the left. So when we get distracted with 15 to 20,000 Haitians under a bridge, that resulted in several hundred miles of border having no Border Patrol agents on it at all. That's where the cartels push the narcotics through, the criminal aliens, people that will not give up. We have over 400,000 documented gotaways, people or incidents where people crossed the border and got away this last year, and hundreds of miles of border where we have no idea what took place. That's what mass migration creates.
You're talking about the cartels and moving all kinds of material, but specifically drugs, through the border. So this, look at the shiny thing over here, happens every day?
It happens every day, and it happens increasingly the more that they can distract, the more that they can overwhelm our resources. So for example, in Del Rio, 100% of the Border Patrol agents for a couple of days were focused on that bridge. But we also keep forgetting that's a big, wide border. McAllen is still out of control. Yuma is getting overrun.
The Biden administration has claimed that the thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants that they have released into the country over the last several months are being, quote, tracked, and that they have implied that there'll be consequences if they don't show up for their court hearings. Is that true?
Again, it's a spin. So I can't say that it's not true, but I can say they're not all being tracked.
Just by manpower issues?
Just by manpower issues. And if every single one of them are being tracked currently, then that has to mean 100% of fugitive operations got shut down.
And if they skip court, I mean, they're not even really allowed to just go after them for that.
Correct, that is accurate. And 90% don't ever get deported.
How big a national security threat is it, that border?
I think it's a real big issue. So knowing that we have 400,000 documented gotaways, when we have less situational awareness than we've ever had before, what we know about every single one of those is they did not want to meet a law enforcement officer. They were not surrendering. They were not claiming asylum. They were doing everything they could. They probably paid extra to be able to go through one of those gaps the cartel controlled.
So when you hear Secretary Mayorkas say the border is as secure now as it was before, what do you say?
That's just not true. He knows what's going on, and he knows that border is not as secure today as it was on January 19th.
Talk about the border wall. What were the instructions after the transition of administrations when it came to the wall?
So a presidential proclamation came out, and it was a 60-day pause that publicly available. We're supposed to do an in-depth study and then come up with a plan going forward. So Border Patrol did its part, everything. That was done within about 2 weeks. Several briefings later, there really had not been any decisions made. It went well beyond the 60 days. Many of those projects today are just still on hold. So we're paying contractors. For a while, it was almost $5 million a day between DOD and DHS. To not build the border wall.
So wait. $5 million a day to not build the wall.
To not build a wall.
Even though they have all the stuff,
There are stacks and stacks of border wall panels. There's hundreds of miles of fiber optic cabling. There's hundreds of cameras that were being installed with that are just sitting. There's no action being taken.
So what do they say when the briefing is, well, this really helps us? If we could just plug this in, if we could just finish this thing, what do they say?
We're not building more wall. There's no conversation. There's no adult dialogue, if you will. It's just a black and white decision. The administration said we're not doing it, so we're not doing it. That money is just trickling away to those contractors for not doing work each day.
What is the Border Patrol morale?
It's struggling right now. It really is struggling right now. Obviously, this administration doesn't really support border security. The current leadership within Border Patrol is doing everything they can to keep the guys focused that the mission matters.
When you heard President Biden say this...
It was horrible what to see, as you saw. To see people treated like they did, horses barely running them over, people being strapped, it's outrageous. I promise you those people will pay. They will be, an investigation underway now, and there will be consequences. There will be consequences.
What did you think?
I was dumbfounded. To take a word from somebody else, I was outraged that all of a sudden due process goes out the window. Border security protects legal immigration, and those guys know it, and that's what they've been doing. And all of a sudden now, due process applies to everybody else but not them. And then all of a sudden our Horse Patrol doing what they're supposed to do, which is prevent people from illegally entering our home, are now the villains.
So it's frustrating.
It's very frustrating.
And do you hear that from guys?
I've taken quite a few phone calls. It is very frustrating. The early retirements are going through the roof within Border Patrol. It worries me tremendously. We're losing a lot of experience.
Rodney, thanks. We are going to have part 2 of this interview with Rodney Scott about the border security tomorrow. Shannon, we'll toss it back to you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.